Destiny is one of those games that's just flat out inspiring for any game artist. Let's start by looking at one of the areas we love the most, the environments. Now, in the launch edition of Destiny, there's really 4 primary environments where you'll spend most of your time: Earth, Venus, Mars, and the Moon. Not necessarily in that order. But all of the environments are incredibly beautiful, and there's a lot of detail that went into the modeling and texturing for these environments, as you can tell from the sheer amount of set dressing across all of them. Rocks on the Moon look very different than rocks on Mars. Well, of course, that's a no-brainer, right? But it's still something that the devs at Bungie had to tackle in order to make the environment seem realistic, and they did an amazing job. But if you look closely at some of the models, you'll notice their position in the world really has an effect on how much detail they've got, and you can learn something from this for your own games. For example, look at this rock. Most of the player characters will be looking at this rock from below, so from that angle, it looks very detailed. Now, if you hop on top, though, you'll notice how the detail put on this rock drops suddenly, because it's not something that most players will see. But if you hop onto this other rock that's much lower, where people will see it more obviously, there's a lot more detail that's put into the top of this rock. This is a great example of how you can cut back on the poly count in your games by trimming portions of assets that won't be seen as much as others. Now, another aspect of the environment we loved was in how expansive they felt. So, for example, here's a shot from Earth. As you can tell, it's absolutely beautiful. But if I pause it right here, you can really get a sense for how far the environment goes. And with the environment haze, you get the feeling that the world spreads for as far as the eye can see. Or in this shot on Venus, you can see a very similar effect. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice quite a bit of movement way off in the distance. Here, let's speed the video up to about 3 times normal speed, just so the movement is a little bit easier to see. You notice that? All of that movement way off in the distance is one of those things that the average gamer may not notice, especially because it's going to be much slower in the game. But it's really what makes the world feel very open and alive. Now, I've never been to Venus myself to confirm, and I probably guess that there was some artistic license taken in the whole atmospheric look for many of the planets. For example, Venus really isn't that lush sort of environment. Now, despite this, if you're looking to create an environment that has a very open feel, then this can be a great source of inspiration for you. Now, the day-night system in Destiny is also incredibly well done. And again, it's one of those things that the average gamer probably would notice a lot more if it weren't there. So we're on Mars in this shot. Again, the video is sped up just so it's a little bit easier to see what would otherwise be a very slow transition from night into day. When you look at it this way, it becomes more obvious what's moving and what's not. Now you can see the clouds that appear to be maybe just a texture rotating around in the sky, and a static background of space that doesn't move, but if you look very, very closely, there's still some twinkling stars in there to bring it to life. And that doesn't even start to touch on some of the other aspects of the environment, like the foliage, which the devs at Bungie used Speed Tree to bring it to life. And it ended up being probably the best foliage we've seen in a game to date. All of this adds up to an amazing amount of detail that's been put into the environments to really make the world you're on seem very expansive, regardless of what planet that world is. Perhaps that expansive feel to the environments is one reason why we felt the level and mission design was so lacking. So with all of those expansive and beautiful environments, we really wanted to be able to explore them and be able to interact with them. Unfortunately, the only way you seem to be able to interact with the environments is really just by killing the inhabitants or by looking at it, which honestly, we would have been fine with just being able to see some of the pretty sights in the environment. Except even though Destiny looks to have some very expansive environments, the exact opposite is true, and you're forced to repeat a lot of the same things over and over again. This shot of your ship flying in orbit is very pretty to look at, but because any sort of travel in Destiny requires you to go to orbit, you'll get really familiar with this sort of shot as you go from mission to mission. Adding to the repetitive feeling of the missions is that after you see the same flying animation, you land on one of the very limited spawn points on a planet. For example, notice here we're picking the Chamber of Night mission. Wait for the mission to load with the same flying ship animation, and once it actually loads, we're at an area called Hellmouth. Now if we go back to orbit, so we can select another mission, because we can only do that from orbit, if you notice, some of the missions on this map have a wreath around the star, and some are just stars. The wreaths are spawn points, so as you can tell, there's only a couple limited spawn points on the planet. So this time, instead of picking the Chamber of Night mission at the very bottom, let's select the Shrine of Oryx mission on the top right. And as this mission launches, using the same ship animation we've seen multiple times already, we're going to be put back on the exact same Hellmouth area that we started the Chamber of Night mission before, because it's the closest spawn point to the mission that we selected. The result of this is that we'll be forced to go back through the exact same area we've already been to, past the same enemies with the same spawn points, and see the same areas of the map. Individually, each of these things may not be too bad, but when you add all of them up together, the result is that the player for your game isn't going to feel as if the expansive world you've built is that expansive when there's all of these repetitive steps that are needed. Although one of the great ways that Destiny helps to break up some of that repetitive feeling is with public events. Basically, they're random missions that show up periodically and offer the chance to get some experience and loot. Because it's completely random, it means you might be fighting your way past the same area of the map that you've been in before, but this time you're going to encounter some different enemies. We just wish that they occurred a little more often to help break it up a little bit more. Now, we loved how this helped add some variation to the gameplay, and they really go a long way to breaking up some of the repetitiveness. Of course, they also rely on other people to be around to help. So if you're not lucky enough to have some people around, as you can see, I was all alone at this point, there's a pretty slim chance you'll be able to complete it successfully. In the end, if there's one area that could sum up what we felt when playing Destiny, it's this one. As we come around the corner of this tunnel, you can see the Jovian Complex text pop up on the screen. Normally, this would indicate we're entering a whole new area of the map, but there's nothing that you can do here. Well, at least not yet. And that feeling of going around a corner with great expectations is really how we felt through a lot of Destiny. That is, the feeling of knowing that there's something great just around the corner, but it's really not here yet. The devs at Bungie have said time and time again that they've built Destiny to be a 10-year game. As a result, the Destiny that you play today can't really be seen as a complete game. And unfortunately, in many ways, it feels exactly that way. Destiny teases an expansive world and an immersive storyline that unfortunately is not able to be very fulfilling quite yet. Despite some of the bigger issues we found with level design, bad voice acting, or smaller annoyances such as the no audio bug, if you're an artist or game dev yourself, then you definitely should pick up Destiny, even if it's only to let yourself be inspired by its rich visuals. Once you do, you'll find that Destiny, as it is right now, still ends up being an incredibly fun game. It has a lot to offer, and with all there is to look forward to in the future for Destiny, you really can't go wrong picking it up. Now, if you haven't already, feel free to add us on Xbox Live or the PlayStation Network using the gamertag Digital-Tutors, and we'll see you online.